So we were watching Whale Wars documentary last night and debating about how Sea Shepherd seems to be a superior methodology for environmentalism because the radical actions create more attention for the cause. So instead of bearing witness, Paul Watson was saying that by actually taking direct action to stop the action that's being condemned, you're actually causing more change than simply witnessing and reporting.
Which brought us to the question and the late night discussion of what is the best way to move forward to increase SCOD's place in the world to support environmentalism. What strategy should we employ to be most effective? And we thought this would be a very good discussion to have between both of us because we both come from different areas of knowledge and apply that to this question.
Paul Watson's Earth Force, he lists the Earth Warrior strategy as the healer, the communicator, the artist, the infiltrator, the catalyst, and the shaman, which are 6. And he also has 5 paths, which are earth, water, fire, wind, and vision. So that's one way that he was talking about strategies.
One way to look at it would be to obtain stronger resources and structure and people involved. The more money you have, the more influence that you can use. The more positions of power you have, the more influence you could exert, which is sort of the same thing as other entities are doing in opposition, such as, government, politicians, corporations, CEOs, and all those other things.
If you're Jeffy and you are vegan, is that more important than Bill Gates donating money towards an environmental cause, or is it less important, or is it not worth trying to?
That's a very good question.
Compare.
And I really like that question because it asks who is more important. I think your inherent question is, does your position of power matter as much? If you're Bill Gates or if you're me,
is it the only thing that matters? So should we all be dedicated to earning as much as we can at all costs? In other words, not being vegan, not acting, not following what we are preaching, and just accumulating power and wealth, so that then we can change the system, which seems to be the way the capitalist system is set up, so that those with power dictate the rules.
Or the alternative you're proposing as well, is it better not to take the path of power so that you can eventually get to a place where you could affect better change and just go from the ground up, the grassroots sort of effort?
Yeah, in other words, is the most important thing that you are vegan, you are doing something that you believe in, and that's more important than...
Right. Do I take the corporate job that may destroy the environment more, but will get me to a point where I amass a lot of money, and then I somehow change directions later on with a big pool of money, and then push that towards environmental causes? Or do I forget about doing my corporate job that may temporarily destroy the environment and not have as much power and resources later on to affect the environment? I think there can be a case to be made for both. I obviously, in spirit, want to go with, be true to yourself, be true to what you're doing. I would suspect a lot of people would struggle with trying to walk that path because
the difficulties of the system, finding a vegan restaurant, for example.
The pressure to survive, to make money to survive, can be huge for some people. And people have responsibilities and different things that they're forced to be needed. On top of all the other facts about how our purchasing power has been eroded by the economic system and the politicians and fiat currency printing more money and increasing inflation, and the costs of basic things are going up, without our salaries going up as much, is a major conflict. So,
and then a third thing would be radical illegal action, like what Paul Watson does, or even terrorists, which we're not.
Yeah, is radical action is taking a path of violent intervention necessary to create environmental change or to force environmental issues. Should we burn down a factory that is creating pollutants? Should we damage CEO's estate should we go to Monsanto's headquarters, jump into their office and burn their computers and tear down their corporate structure? Is that going to be effective? I think we have the case of ELF has demonstrated already that it's not really going to be that effective. What they did was temporarily successful, but it only put more of a black eye in
because
that direction.
the media reception was not encouraging, and it brought up questions of whether they were immoral in that they were risking human lives. I think that's some of Paul Watson's critics, would say that aggression to the point of violence is almost defeating humanitarian purposes.
Yeah. However, I think people who would criticize Paul Watson for some of his actions that are violent per se aren't necessarily, he will ram a fishing vessel that is, poaching fish illegally and is having problems with all sorts of nations and governments. So it doesn't really matter if he's ramming that vessel or not, because it's already condemned by a lot of other nations anyway, in that no one's going to protect that vessel anyway. The necessary intervention that, it seems somewhat morally justified. And Sea Shepherd takes great care not to hurt anybody. If they're sinking a ship, they want to make sure that nobody is on that ship, as demonstrated in the documentary we watched last night, which is Eco Pirate, a Paul Watson story. He sank those ships, but he made sure nobody was on them and no one was going to get hurt. And Sea Shepherd, I'm proud to say, has a good record of not hurting anybody. I don't think they have really hurt anybody in their campaign thus far.
And he was talking last night about getting the sex, violence, and is it pop culture that he had. So he had, he's friends with famous people. So somehow along the way, maybe through media coverage, they've become friends with famous people that were more famous than them.
Yep.
And then they're able to fund larger...
Right. With the example of the clubbing of the seals, he brought Brigitte Bardot hugging a seal and took a picture, and that spoke volumes in words about the slaughter of seals in Canada, which made a huge difference. I think one way that I always fall back is to education. Education is one way that is nonviolent, is also, a positive force. And we have to always focus on that in the expression of knowledge, in the sharing of information, and the broadcasting and radiating of this way just has to go into every single form possible. I don't know, what would you say if you could take SCOD and you had a way to invest energy into SCOD in a new, different way? What one way would you pick?
Yeah, sure. Set up a school based on the thought of free education as in sharing. However, in the capitalist system, you have to have some kind of funding. So regardless, education's important. And then, of course, sustainable, cooperative, organic development and dwelling. So those words are essential towards trying to evolve ways of better architectural design, preservation of history and landscape, natural environment, and environmentalism, so respect for science and ecology. These are the basic wisdoms that shaped the theory of SCOD and could be extrapolated and continued as schools, education, and also workshops, seminars, communities, developments. So one proposal of SCOD is rather than suburban sprawl, you would have SCOD communities which would not depend on an electric grid, but be more self-sustaining, more encouraging towards individualism, but at the same time allowing individuals to express themselves as added value democratically to the whole, not individualism against other individuals, but individualism as a collective expression.
Right, you're saying everybody has their individualistic living with a communal aspect of it. I think we see that in a few different places where they develop models like that. Like Belfast, Maine has their community living where everybody has their own house and then they share equipment. Their community has, the community mechanic and the community doctor and the community. Yeah, they have meals once a week for the entire community. And
all the words we use are loaded, so if you can really pick out the value of certain words, so in other words, commune is not just for hippies. It means communal living, and within a community, you can have different levels and varieties of isolation and a coming together.
It's not one strict standard. It's similar to the yin yang or yin yang. Nothing is, the yin yang is not a straight line across. It's a wave line through. Nothing is 50-50 exactly. There's some variation always, but there's a general sort of balance.
I feel
yin yang.
Yeah, SCOD allows for eclecticism, so you can be from any number of backgrounds, as long as there's a combined value in coming together to do things, ecology, environmentalism, and preservation, respect for history and culture. And if you have those things, what it is there seems to be a core of humanity. So civil rights is another one. So if you have some of these core principles that we include in humanitarianism or that we value ethically or morally, then you can allow for a nudist colony, you can allow for an Amish colony, and that they should be seen as equal legally, so you can have an atheist colony.
You could design your own communal living to adapt to your particular way, or there's variable parts of it, but the structured system is sort of the same. So then, do you need to just start building? Is the answer to build SCOD development and then market that to the world? Do you need to recruit a rich person to fund entire different things? Do you need to become a super rich person to afford to make all this yourself with your own financial resources? And
that's the problem, is the system is set up to facilitate those with power and money. So development is being done by those who are greedy because they are the most vicious dogs in the fight of life. So in other words, they chase the money, they want to make the most money, they have a rabid approach to business.
Could you do SCOD without an extreme amount of money?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's based on case studies that have been done since the dawn of civilization. So it doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter, the class and the economics don't matter as much, whether you're going to use currency, whether you're going to emphasize trading and bartering. The concept is that you can base it on some conglomeration of ideals and ethics, but if you have multiple SCOD communities based on the main clients, okay, so it's client-based, so if you have an atheist group, they're going to be mostly atheists. However, each SCOD group should not be prejudiced, in other words, to the point of exiling non-believers, without reasonable justification. So in other words, you don't want to have extreme communities that do not tolerate others to live with them. The only reason why you would want to, tell somebody they probably shouldn't live at a group that they don't agree with is if it becomes a problem. However, in other words, living at that community should not be based on your belief. It should be whether you want to be there or not. So you may want to learn from that community. So in other words, where races and cultures and religions get into problem is saying you're not allowed to wear our headdress, or it would be like a Celtic person saying you're allowed to wear a Celtic torque if you're not Celtic. The problem is that we should be allowing fools to exist. There's all different ways that we function. There's character types, archetypes of people, and so there's always going to be foolish people. There's always going to be people playing that role, and we have to allow that there's going to be dysfunction. We've got to allow that there's going to be homelessness. We've got to allow that there's going to be people that are addicted to things, and if we know that, we can try to all get along better.
So it sounds like almost as though you might need a small collective group of people to volunteer to try this out.
Which it's happening all the time. It's just not called SCOD. It's happening in different ways all the time.
Or the idea would have to be really concentrated and replicated as a model. And then maybe bringing it to people who would be, I don't want to say sympathetic, but more like open to it.
It's embracing biodiversity. It's embracing alternative communities. So what it is saying, rather than creating cardboard cutout developments, just because that's the way we've been doing things for no, for no apparent reason other than that, it's saying, let's value our own interests. Let's listen to what's wrong with society. What a lot of people are saying we're sick of, commuting, this type of thing, and allow that some people may want to commute, but that maybe more of us are becoming more interested in self-sustaining methods that don't ruin the planet as much for human use.
So should we develop pro-SCOD YouTube videos and sound bites on specific topics?
Right.
One supporting SCOD concepts and other videos pointing out the inconsistencies of other positions?
Right. So
then you would have to find a way to promote that, or find a way to, and I think that's where the struggle is that people agree. Once you look into what you've created with SCOD, people agree with it. A lot of people agree with it.
It's like a movement, so it's based on movements like the hippie movement, the punk rock movement, is that everybody will have their own definitions, what they perceive it as, what they come to it with. And so there's no one definition, and that's, I think, the success of the movements also, is because there's many factors, reasons for the existence of the movement. So SCOD embraces these movements as is trying to say, let's be more thoughtful about design. Let's allow that there's going to be...
So then, could you then say, these are good designs, these are bad designs, these are good designs. Please tell town council person blah that this design is bad.
Yeah, there's going to be...
And send that to everybody. So it becomes, is that the direction to go? Like, campaign, are you... is there a political faction of this where you're politically mobilizing people to support SCOD concepts?
Right. So my approach has been that propaganda is not good or bad. Propaganda is like communication. So it's a type of communication. So propaganda is not necessarily false. Okay?
Right. This would be,
my definition of propaganda is that it's not false advertising. It's advertising to promote something. So World War II had propaganda for the Allies.
Right.
And against the enemy. So if you believe in the cause, propaganda is justified. And if you're not making up horrendous lies, it's valid because you're promoting your cause. That's advertising. That's not good or bad.
Let's just call it promoting your cause. In promoting through mobilizing people to take action, opposing SCOD's enemies, for which you call it, a developer who wants to build yet another subdivision that's going to be horrible without certain elements and designs in it, and mobilize people to support that, to fight against that.
See, because there's an uphill battle. That's why, making up some outrageous fiction to catch people's attention, or do something crazy like Paul Watson does, that's creating propaganda for a movement. And it's justified because Dan Ryan Homes doesn't have to use propaganda to build 1,000 homes and destroy farmland. Why? Because the system allows him to do it. It's allowing him it's facilitating him to destroy the farmland. He doesn't need to advertise. He just does it.
He just does it because... Well, maybe that's a good point to look into. What is enabling him to do what he's doing? Number one,
the power players.
Power.
His reasoning that it's good to be greedy. It's good to get the most money you can.
Well, power-wise, you're talking about his position of power?
Like when so Dan Ryan walks into the county planning office, I'm just imagining, or his representatives. Here's our proposal. We'd like to put this many houses and do away with all these farms. We want $200,000 from the county budget to do this.
Yep.
Okay, let's do that. So that's a conspiracy right there that they're enacting.
So then, number one, that is their advocacy to push the county, and then the county's lack of defense for that, or the people involved. Maybe there's people in corruption involved.
The thinking is how many houses, how many people can we jam onto one piece of property to maximize profit, regardless of the environment, regardless of historic preservation, regardless of traffic flow.
So you have the structure and the philosophy of the SCOD part, how do you get people to apply that? Either, through education will get you so far. I've heard other people say that, there is some sort of need for people to be forced to make environmental changes. Is there a way to force it somehow?
I think my view has been all of the above. Like, I really believe as much as any type.
And maybe the way is just, and this is what I get into talking about, sort of in a deeply spiritual way, is you're raising consciousness. You're building energetic alliances with people, and then strengthening those alliances and strengthening your resolve on these things.
Yeah, build
having a coordinated network
build
that
relationships,
responds.
networks. Then you have people playing different roles. So you have satire, you have advertising, you have propaganda, you have a building, a sculpture, art, you have architecture, you have education, you have socializing. What's popular?
So maybe one way that would, within your control, to be able to, because obviously, say you run for office and you win, now you're the power player there, and you can say no. That's one way to go and do that. Are you going to be able to get elected and maintain that and deal with the structure of having that sort of job? I don't know. But another way to do that is to strengthen your network and your fluidity for advocacy for picking out these things. So when you send out a beacon of another development wants to go up, your beacon goes out, and the person who does satire, the person draws a silly comic, cartoon, ridicule. Other people go up and call their senators or call their politicians to complain about it. There's somebody else who maybe knows a cousin in the office or whatever, and is able to set up a meeting for you to present your structured SCOD reasons for why this development isn't good. And I agree with Paul Watson's Earth Force, never quit, never surrender.
Nice.
Where this isn't mobilization for this one time. You are going to fight this until you're, dead or gone. You're never quitting.
Nice.
The person has to know that you are not giving up under any circumstances.
Nice.
And with that in mind, that's the way it's going to be.
Yeah, like on one specific project where I know that I would like it to go more environmental and be more like SCOD, interested in preservation, but I realize that the current owners would like it to go the other way. I'm still open to being hired by the current owners or their opposition. Either way, both parties know what my position is, and I'm not going to change. I'm going to negotiate, but I'm not going to, just do whatever they say because they want to pay me. Right.
I think at the very basic of it is building and strengthening alliances. In Sun Tzu, The Art of War, if you can't directly kill your enemy, you start building alliances and strengthening your alliances and working on people around them.
Yeah, good point.
To weaken their position.
Yeah.
And that's somehow, in a way, what you can do.
Yeah. Like sieging a big city with an army that can't get in, you undermine the foundations, and you stop people coming to them, cut off the road, cut off their supplies.
There was a documentary about suburban sprawl, a few of them, so I think there's awareness out there. But how many people have watched that? Probably just me. I don't know.
So that's why I think Paul Watson's obviously onto something with all his cumulative efforts.